Hey everyone, welcome to Unpacked and Unfiltered Tuesdays with Becky and Doris. I'm Doris.
And I'm Becky.
And yay, we're literally just two friends who talk way too much and figure out why not record it.
We talk about the real life messy challenges in business and family, sharing the mindset shifts and streamlined business systems that actually keep us sane. So basically, if you want real conversations about the messy middle of life, work, family, finding yourself when you've lost the plot, you're in the right place.
Excellent.
But anyway, what are we talking about today? We are talking
about it's okay to want to work, balancing the desire to work and pressure of being a parent. How about we do that?
Yes. Let's go for it.
Let's go.
Go for it.
Okay, so question. So when you decided to become parents, what were your thoughts about work?
I don't know. I don't think I ever really considered that I would give up work. And that thought never crossed my mind. And that was probably because it's ingrained into me that I have to work. And we have to be able to provide, right? It did cross my mind that actually I would probably reduce my hours so that I could fit this all together. And then there was also, I always remember the panic, because actually in my head, when we were just becoming parents, that whole thing of, okay, what the heck am I meant to do for holidays? Because my annual leave isn't going to cover it for school holidays. And Gareth's annual leave isn't going to cover it for school holidays. And actually, if we do it, we're going to go two separate ways and we're never going to see each other. So I think there was just that. There was never a consideration that I wouldn't work. But there was also that same panic that was, how do we actually make this work? How the hell do people do this? That whole juggling act. And actually, it's funny though, because when Seb was 2, so my eldest was 2, I got to that point where I'd changed roles, and actually I'd gone into a term time role.
Okay.
But actually I was doing a lot more. I'd got to a breaking point, let's say. And when Seb was 2, it got to October and I handed in my resignation to corporate with no intention at that particular moment to go out and find an employed role and go through interview. I couldn't put myself through that. But there was still in my head that whole thing of, I do need something more than just being a mum. So yeah, I went through that whole thing, and then obviously ended up doing what I'm doing now a few months later. But the whole prospect of, do I work or do I not work? It didn't cross my mind. And I think there's that whole, it's very difficult now, isn't it? Because it is that, how can we survive without working? But then there's the whole internal guilt of, but I want to be there for my children. I want to see them grow up. I want to be able to spend time with them. And it's finding that balance, isn't it? And
it is. And I got a couple of questions. So when you talked about, how do parents work this, you thought about how is it going to work with school holidays from basically when the kids were babies?
Yeah.
Well, when said the first one was a baby or a second one wasn't born yet, right? See, I didn't come into that reality until my kids started kindergarten. So
Yeah.
because we went to nursery, and nursery is great, right? Because they basically
Yes.
don't have any holidays. There is no term time when they're in nursery, right? So basically up until they're 4 or 5 or whatever, right? When they start kindergarten, it was easy for us, right? But like you, I coming from a corporate background, also I think part of it maybe was because I was an older parent, right? I was 37 when I had Samuel, and I'd had a good a decade in corporate, right?
Yeah.
So, and in my in my corporate days, my life ran on spreadsheets.
Yeah.
That's actually how I conceived the number one child. That's a separate story, right? Let's leave that separate story.
That organization.
Yeah. So, but with children, when the first one came along, mine, I wanted to go back to work because, yes, I wanted to become a mom, but very quickly, maybe first one took a little bit longer, but maybe about 4 or 5 months in, the first 4 or 5 months for my first one was awful because he didn't sleep. But very quickly, I realized that I wasn't getting the mental stimulation.
Yes.
So I loved being a mom. I loved the experience of it, apart from, at the same time being absolutely frustrated. It's like, how difficult is it to go to sleep? I mean, seriously, you tell me to go to sleep, done, right? And this little thing, right, starts crying or whatever else. But aside from that, it was that this is not very exciting. It was very beautiful in a very emotional way, but intellectually it wasn't giving me anything apart from a headache about not sleeping, right? But it's that kind of mental stimulation in terms of I wasn't used to that. I wasn't used to, I took 10 months off for each of them, and after the first one, about 7 months in, I was literally climbing the walls wanting to come back to work. But I told work, and also I worked for a big company and a fantastic maternity pay, right? So, and then, you take your statutory, it's like, well, there's really no real financial benefit apart from my mental stimulation to go back to work from a financial perspective. So I could take the full 9 months off, basically, and then had some holidays. So I took 10 months because I needed to take them. And it's kind of like, but I was 7 months. I was like, how can you get me out here? Right? Because I'm so bored. Literally, that was how I felt. I felt so bored being at home, staying with, just with one child. And, we had classes, and we had NCT classes, and there were, about half a dozen women around the same time who were, around ours, birthdays around the same time. We met up together, and yes, we went go for walks, and and had picnics, and play groups with the kids and all this kind of stuff, and that was fun. But it wasn't mentally stimulating because I think my brain was still, well, but spreadsheets. What do I do? Because spreadsheets, when the baby comes along, you throw out a frigging window, right? They don't follow any, right? Because it didn't work. I tried. Trust me. I tried to put my days into schedule. It didn't work. So, and I got really bored because everyone around me was so engrossed in what was going into the child and what was coming out of the child, right? And how the child was growing. And I sat there, I was like, yeah, I'm not here to compare. You can't help sometimes but to compare, right? Oh, mine is a bit slower than that. Oh, mine is not doing that yet. Oh, yours is doing that, all this kind of stuff. But I was like, can we talk about anything else than the kids? Because there is still me. And not that to say that is right or wrong, right? It isn't.
Oh,
for
God,
me,
that's it. Yeah.
Yeah. For me, I knew I wanted to become a mommy, but I wanted to become more than just a mommy. For me, because I worked so hard in corporate that I didn't want to let go, because I had fun in corporate. I had fun. I was going places, I was doing things. I was making things happen, and I felt, I guess, useful.
And it's also it's that you as well. It's that part of you and who you were.
Yes. But saying on the same side, I had friends who, when they were in corporate and when they became a parent, that's all they wanted. That's all they ever really wanted. And they then stayed and became amazing stay-at-home parents. But I couldn't see that for me. And it actually bored me, especially when they're that young. Yes, and kids grow up very, very quickly, I'm there for I was there for milestones, the first little steps and all this kind of stuff, right? But it was that kind of like, it wasn't, to me, it wasn't, this is going to sound really horrible probably, but it wasn't, I was in awe, but it wasn't awe-inspiring, if you know what I mean. I could, if I could think about it, and when I was pregnant, I was like, there's this alien growing inside me. How cool is this, right? It's that whole, not nature, but how does this work, right? And it's kind of like, and then it happens, and you kind of sit there, oh my God, this human being, and you see things. Oh, obviously when they're sleeping, oh, that's what's definitely was elbow. I remember, because when I was here, definitely elbow. You can see little things, and there is this obviously this amazing bonding and this outpouring of love. But for me, initially, first thing, it was kind of like not this mega outpouring of love. It's more like, oh shit, what have I done? Because it was easy when it was inside, because I could do everything all I wanted, really, apart from a big belly, right, and sore ankles. But it's like, now I've got this thing that's now outside of me, and now I've got to take care of it. And I was like, I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to do that. That was really scary. But like most parents, we kind of muck in, and you're over sensitized with the first one, right? And the second one comes along, whatever.
Raise yourself.
Basically, oh, you got temperature? You'll be fine. You'll be fine. I don't need to go and see a doctor. I don't need to see anyone. I'll stick some Calpol inside you, right? You'll be fine. And we're so much more relaxed, right? But it's that kind of, and for me as well, it was that kind of, I want to go back to work, because I guess I felt that I could make more of an impact at work in a funny way. I knew I was needed and required, to bring up these two kids, but I needed it for me.
Yeah.
And the thing is that, when the kids start nursery and school and kind of stuff, what am I going to do with myself for those 8 hours if I'm not working? So for me, it was that kind of like, and I got a lot of joy, and I got a lot of mental stimulation, and there was this pride, and all this kind of stuff, and that kind of proper adult interaction that I wouldn't get every single day if I stayed at home with my children.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to that whole thing of, yes, it's okay, the fact that if you've been working and actually you've had your children and that's what you want to do. Everybody is so different, and everybody has their own views, and it's just I find it's really hard for those it probably sounds so wrong, and it's not meant to sound probably wrong, but it's that whole, for those of us who want to go back into work, it comes back to the title of this episode, that whole balance between that desire to work and be a parent as well. We want to do both. There's no, well, actually, I don't want to do that one and I want to do that one, or I want to do that one and I don't want to do that one. It is, we want to do both. And it is that, well, how do we then deal with that kind of pressure that comes from work and wanting to still maintain who we were at work before children, and still maintain that I want to be a good mother or parent? Because I remember going back to work. I remember specifically this one day, and I was a project support officer, and I was working on conferences, and it was our senior management conference. I'd been doing this for about 5 years, and I could do it with my eyes closed before I had Seb. And I went back, and we went and did it, and I'd managed to get there. And I just remember standing in the room and being like, my brain is not working. My brain, why is this so difficult when I could do this before? Why can my brain not function to do this anymore? And I had to change kind of the expectations of myself and change and adapt, knowing that I had this other role as a parent as well, and try and learn that balance and learn kind of, right, okay, things don't quite work the same anymore, and there are two pressures coming in from me or towards me, and I need to learn how to adapt where I need to balance out these pressures depending on what day of the week it is or what week it is, because it always changes, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And it's, I think the overarching thing will always be for me is that the guilt from both sides of the coin, the guilt from work, the guilt from home, and the whole mental noise that comes with it.
Yeah. I mean that whole thing, the whole phenomenon that they typically say, the mum guilt, right? It's a real thing, right? And and in some ways it's also not a surprise, because if we take away just our individual situations, right? If we look at the previous generations, right? 3 generations, even our moms and our grandparents, right? If you've got any left, they did things in a certain way, and we absorbed all of that unconsciously, right? And then society back in even when I was born, born in 75. So back then it was still culturally, right? It was still very much a dad working and a mom staying at home, right? And since the beginning of the industrial revolution, probably, right? Go back in history, that's how society's been set up, right? One working family, so there's someone always at home, right, to take care of the child, right? But now in 2026, that's not real life anymore. But society is still outside of our homes, right? Outside in the working. That is still how things are set up. Okay, that's not that every company's like this. Some companies are now much more forward thinking and more inclusive, and and not put female or women on a go slow pace as they become parents or whatever else, right? Because men don't have that problem, right? But also men are typically the ones who take a year out, right? And yes, we now have equal leave, right, for which is amazing. It wasn't available when I had my kids, right? That was oldest one's only 13, right? That didn't exist then. Right now, there's regulations in place now, legislation in place to say, hey, actually, you can split your maternity leave for a year, your 6 months each if you want, or however you decide to do it, right? And that's all great. But general society out there is still very much, you guys work out yourselves, right? There isn't, and companies can put in as many policies as they like, right? But it's then also just down to the individual, manager, whoever, to help their employees, their staff through it. But that expectation itself is, we've got it ingrained inside of us that, because my mom did everything, right? In terms of inside the house, right? Inside the house, all the kids, kind of more traditional, although both my mum and dad worked, inside the house, everything is my mum's responsibility, right? The kids, cleaning, inside the house, the cooking, right? Outside the house, in the takeaway in restaurants, right? The cooking bits and all that kind of stuff, that was my dad's, right? But inside the house, so I agree with all that. So, that to me, that's what life was supposed to look like. Inside the house, it's the girl's job, right? And I did it from a very young age, right? I'm one of 4. I was the one who got the younger ones out of bed, take them to school. So I took on that role from a very young age. So I didn't know any different. Now looking back, I'm like, yeah. So, in my household, both, I've got a boy and a girl, they're equal. There isn't, only you do this. They have their preferences, right? But only you do that. There is no sexist, I guess, if you could call that behavior. But for us, we go in and we're the ones who carry these babies in us, and and we push them out. And like you say, you choose then to go back to work, which is great, right? But we kind of initially, like you said, right, we start back work comparing ourselves to pre-mummy time.
Yes.
I could do all of this, 2 hands tied behind my back and a blindfold on, right? Now you go in and do exactly the same thing, and it's like 100 times harder, right? And you're saying, like, why is it? And the thing is that we are so bad at giving ourselves compassion, right? Because we're comparing us to ourselves basically to a year ago, right? When none of this happens, right? And you're like, well, I could do all of this and now I can't, right? And so we're so hard on ourselves. We then start negotiating and stuff. Oh, do you know what? It's okay, because actually I've got this whole other life, right? Which is the child and family, and new family unit of now 3 people instead of just 2 adults, right? And everything that comes with that. And life becomes transactional for the first couple of years, right? Because it's all about, can we keep this little thing alive, right? That's our biggest aim, right? To keep this little thing alive, and to ensure that we stay alive, to ensure that this little thing, and it's like you say, it's survival, right? And it doesn't really matter how much money you've got, it's still kind of survival, right? For normal people, and it's that kind of like, you go in every day and you're absolutely knackered, especially if the baby doesn't sleep at night or whatever else, right? And you're sitting there like, but my career trajectory was like this.
Yeah.
Before I kind of stepped out of it for a year, and then I stepped back on it, and then I expected to go like that.
Yeah.
But actually, maybe you can go like that, and that's great if you can, right? But a lot of people say, like you say, it's like, oh, maybe I want to go back kind of part-time, right? Because this is a new phase in my life. I'm not saying I want to go part-time maybe for forever. I wanted to go back to work. For me, in my head, work was always kind of more holiday than comparison to stay at home with a child, right? Because I was like, because I felt much more in control at work. And I had so many years of successful corporate career. I was in control at work. I knew exactly. I knew how to fix my friggin' spreadsheet, or if something didn't work, I knew who to call to help me fix it.
Yeah.
This baby, there's no one to call.
There's nobody. All different.
I could call my mom for advice, or other, but they couldn't help me fix my baby, right? No one could come in at 3 o'clock in the morning and say, could you please just keep the baby? I just want you to sleep. My parents live in Scotland, 8 hours away, drive-wise. You know what I mean? No one could do that for you, right? Only yourself, right? And at home, I felt so out of control, and which was a really strange feeling for me, because I've kind of, since I was an adult, I was always in control of what I was doing and all this kind of stuff, right? So for me, going back to work was just like, yep, I know what I'm doing at work. But like you say, it was that, especially when the kids got ill, and don't they always get ill at the most inopportune time?
Yeah.
Always. They obviously sense something. I'm stressed, so the baby then pukes up, and you've got this beautiful racing line, down your immaculate suit that you're in. Yes. Very important meeting, right? I look back right now, why the hell did I care? But I would get really stressed and upset about that. Being an ungrateful child. I'm about to take you to nursery, and now you don't really have enough time, and I don't, have a spare suit in the back of the car, because galore nappies, galore wet wipes. So wet wipes goes out, and you kind of like, oh, I'll be fine, But it's that for me, it was that kind of, and we talk about balance, and like the word fine, balance is also another word that I kind of have a love-hate, probably more of a hate relationship with, just because of what it personifies in people's head. Balance means equal, typically, right? And it's always equal, but life is never equal. I can't give equal amounts to my work, and the same equal amounts to my family, and equal amounts to my friends, and equal amounts to whoever, right? It just doesn't work. So,
and the reality is, it changes every day or every week, depending on what on earth is going on.
Exactly that, right? And it's kind of like, so I'm kind of maybe leaning more into the whole kind of alignment, whatever aligns for you in that moment in time. If it means 80-20, if it means 10-9, it doesn't matter. Whatever is right for you. And like you said, everyone is different, right? And I'm not here to make any judgment on anyone else. I'm just saying, from my perspective, I needed this. And yes, did I feel guilty about going back to work? And did I feel guilty about thinking that my child is such a nuisance because can you just give me 5 minutes, right, to really just figure out this email? But I'm at home. So I'm at home. I should be focused on my kids, but my head is, oh yeah, but I've got this presentation next week, or this email to this client, or the customers just called me. We've got to deal with it and all this kind of stuff. And you feel guilty, right? But when I'm at work, then I feel guilty about, I snapped that little one yesterday, right? Or this morning, picking them up, and and I know they kind of went to school with a little bit of a high temperature, but we dosed them up and didn't tell anybody, right? Because I've got to work. Shh, don't ever tell anyone that, right? But it's that kind of, and then you feel guilty. It's like, you know what? I could have just stayed at home, right, with the little one. It wouldn't have made any difference. I could call in sick for the day, but it's this personal kind of professional pride that says, no, I've got to be at work. Right?
But let's take a moment there as well, because actually, if I backtrack in terms of, talking about the fact that we have the expectations that we should be able to do the things that we used to be able to at work, there's also, isn't there the pressure that comes from the external team that is around you, that you have changed, that actually you've come back and maybe you're working part-time and they don't get to do that because they've not got children and things like that, and there's that extra pressure that feeds into that, which then turns that in that moment where the kids are sick and you've got to send them in, you've got to do this presentation, so you're stressed like, oh, what do I do? Because there's that expectation of yourself to be able to just do this. But then there's that whole, but I need to prove to these people around me that I can do this because I think they are judging me and they are questioning why I'm allowed to do what I can do.
Yes.
And they're not.
What?
And it that all feeds into that kind of that guilt of, I could have just taken the day off.
Yes. And I think it's that. And I think, when I had ours, I was probably not open enough about my own personal challenges, right? But like you say, it's that internal self-perception, right? About, if I say that, I've got to leave early because, forever. Obviously, if there's, if there was an emergency and as in the nursery called in, I've got to go and pick up my child, there was nothing I could do. I would obviously go and do that. But there's that kind of like, I cannot show a different side of me, right? Because the pre-pregnant me, right, was this kind of person, right? So, and now I'm kind of here literally surviving, right? I mean, keeping other humans apart from myself alive, right? Big job, right? But we kind of don't recognize it. We kind of try and push it to a side because this has got nothing to do with work. Right, me having a child is my own personal issue, and I wouldn't appreciate it if my company taught me how to raise my child. Right, so is that kind of, for me, it was that kind of this is totally outside of work, and I didn't allow myself probably, and looking back, there weren't all that many role models either for when I was in corporate that were a bit more whole, if I can use that word, whole about their life. We kind of kept life apart. And yes, of course, you talked about the kids and you talked about holidays and where you went and whatever, but we didn't really talk about the struggle, right? Yeah. And we never, as a team, talked about, hey, everyone, congratulations, you're going back to work. But we never had that kind of open conversation. Hey, what does this mean now for you and us? And how can we as a team still work well together, right, and meet our goals and targets, blah blah blah. We didn't do any of that, and I don't know whether companies do now. I've left corporate 5-6 years ago now, right? But it's that kind of, if I was a bit more open, I wonder whether things would have been easier.
Yeah.
But part of me felt like I'd be kind of dumping my own emotional shit you know, people who may or may not be interested or whatever else. But a lot of it was here because I helped myself to this. This is the version of me who is a corporate, right? So I've got to go back to this person, but this person is kind of as an identity wise is in the past. She's gone,
Yeah.
but I kept hanging on. I've evolved, but I'm like, no, I've got to be here because this is who I was before I left corporate, right? For 10 months, I've got to go back to her. And instead of allowing myself to kind of, no, and being clear about what it is that I wanted and what I could or could not do, or actually, I currently don't know. So I'm here to try out, right?
Yeah.
I wasn't that vulnerable. I just said, no, that this is who I am. I'm going to go back to her, right? And that for me, looking back now, was a real struggle.
Yeah.
I struggled for probably the first 5 years after becoming a parent. It was like, why is life so friggin' hard?
Yeah.
But I wanted to go to work because it gave me a lot of pleasure, right?
Yeah.
In terms of, and I felt useful. I felt as if I was contributing apart from, inside the family. But there is still this pressure, and depending on some cultures, I'm sure. I've got a friend who is a German native. She said, based on where she is from, right, in Germany, when women go back to work, they literally get the evil eye, as in you're a bad parent because you're going to work. You should stay home and literally give up your whole entire life for your child that you're bringing up. And, but, with all the personal development I've done over the years, kind of like, I deserve a life too. And I deserve to live the life that I want to live, kids or no kids. And for me, that was the biggest revelation I've had in the last few years. It's kind of like, because I matter too. I'm more than just the title. I'm more than just a wife. I'm more than just a mummy. I'm more than just an employee. I'm more than, I'm all of them. But I get to choose. Right?
I always find that it's when did it become seeing we have that old saying of it takes a village to raise a child, right? So when did that become not a thing? And actually, and this is probably going to sound really wrong, and obviously everybody's families look different, but when did it then become it takes a mother to raise a child? Because that's essentially what we're kind of saying. If you look at it from that perspective, is that it takes a mother. But what happened to this idea of it takes a village to raise them?
Well, and you know what? I think it's that kind of back in the olden days, as my children will say, right? They think I'm that old. But when there wasn't, I think, proper schooling, right, and structured schooling, it probably did, right? But I think that whole community back in those days, I think with how the world is now, we've probably lost some of that.
Yeah.
Right, because people now move away, very far away, right? To have their own lives. And back 50 years ago, it really didn't happen very much, right? People might move to the next village, maybe, right? But they stay close, right, to the core, stay close towards their parents, right? So their parents were always close by, whatever. But now people move miles away now. And actually, even nowadays, I think some, grandparents are like, oh, I don't want to help you look after your child 3 days a week, or I'll do it once a week, or holidays, because they've worked so hard. They're now retired. They want to have their own life. They just don't want to sit there and be at your beck and call, right? And and from my side, it's like, fair enough, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And you definitely, for however long you've got left, go and live your life, right? But just as they're about to now live their potentially best lives after retirement, here I am popping out kids and saying, throw them back in, right? But it's that kind of saying that, though, that I've got a pretty good deal with my parents, right? But it's that kind of, I think that kind of community feel where everyone chips in has been diluted, I guess. And also
it's not evolved as we've evolved as a society.
And also we have become also probably more opinionated.
Yes.
And we are less willing to kind of just conform because this is how they've always done it, so we'll just have to do it the same, because the old adage of if it ain't broken, then you fix it, right? But I'm like, yeah, but I don't want to bring up my children the same way that I was brought up.
Yeah.
Because I can see some of the pitfalls, and I can see some of the things that I experienced that I don't want my children to be like, to be brought up like that. So yes, back to the whole, why is it just a woman? I think for me personally, oh, this is going to hurt to say a little bit, part of it felt personal pride.
Yeah.
In terms of friggin' millions of women do this every single year. Why am I any different? I'm not any different, and I can do it too, right? I'm not special. If they can do it, I friggin' well can do it. And it's that kind of being an adult and being in control. I don't need help. Why do I need help? Because asking for help is friggin' weakness, isn't it? I'll just zip and smile. Of course I've got it. Yeah, everything is just fine. Everything is just fine, like this, right? And I think it's that kind of, and I think it's probably some of that is now also changing now, right? But it's that, I think, as long as you're open with what it is that you want and you desire, who's to say that? And the only thing is that if you open your mouth and ask for help, the worst thing that can happen is exactly the same way you are just now, which is no help at all. It's not going to get any worse than that, right? But it might get a lot better, right? And it's just kind of, we keep talking about this all the time. We don't have to think that we have to go through everything all by ourselves.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
And not even just asking for outside help, even asking our husbands or our partners for help. Can you just please do this?
Yeah.
But because we're not used to asking them, right? We think, oh, well, he won't do it. Or he'll probably be easy. The thing is that it's just the kind of like the easiness. Kind of, oh, you look as if you've got it all in order. So I'm not messing up.
Yeah, don't need to get involved.
Right? And until I say that, hey, actually, it doesn't work, the poor guy, if only he could have, the superpower of reading what goes on in my brain, probably send him spinning off somewhere else, right? But, if he could, we expect him to do that, but we can't.
No.
Right? And all we can do is just ask and say, hey, actually, you know what? This works, and actually, I need help, right? And it's okay because...
Communication.
Yes, that's the thing. The whole communication in if there's such a thing as the right way, not telepathically, not facially,
going wrong,
but speaking and in the right way, all to do with the tones that we use. And I think it's that kind of so is there a balance and alignment to be had among the pressure? Yeah, I think yes, but it's all depending on what it is that you want. And as long as you're clear about what it is that you want, then it makes life a little bit easier. Right? Doesn't mean that life is all going to be all easy, right? But then we can then really be clear, say, hey, this is what's worked. And for you, it's like you said, I know I don't want to go back into employment. I want to start up my own thing, and I want my own thing to flex and morph into along with our kids.
Yeah.
And I stuck more to the rigid one, which is no, I'll do the corporate, 60-hour weeks and all that kind of stuff. And I put kids into breakfast club and after school club and all this kind of stuff, right? To make my life easier, right? Until I stepped away from it. I was like, oh, actually, while I was going through it, not all of it worked either, right? And there is this kind of, you know what? This week it's going to be like this. Next week it's going to be like that. And it's all okay.
It's being okay with it, isn't it? And it's knowing, this is just what it looks like right now.
Yes, I think
just to finish that off then, in terms of what I was going to say, I assume that some of the clients that you see, there are elements of this whole kind of concept of finding that balance between the work pressure and the pressure of being a parent. What is the one thing that you start with them when you see the elements of this come in as a way to help them move forward or move past that blocker and move past those kind of brain monkeys that are sitting there?
Well, so typically the conversations I have kind of, quite early on is all about what does success look like for them, right? Yeah. And also what their belief system is, right? whose belief is this, right? Whose life are you truly leading? Is this your own life, or is this some sort of, puzzle pieces that you all put together since you've lived, as long as you've lived on life, and you've just taken all pieces and took it as this is my
societal pressures, parental pressure,
you work and what you see other people doing, your friends doing, your best friend doing, or whatever else, right? And it's teasing all of that out, right? To say, hey, this is your life, right? And it's kind of giving them permission to say, look, just because so and 80% or 90% what you perceive 90% of the rest of the population is doing doesn't mean you've got to do it. It is okay to want something different, to want some different flavors, right? We all have the similar recipe, right? Yes, we've got bills to pay, we've got school to pay for, maybe, right? We've got to go on holidays and we've got to work and we've got kids, but how you put all of that together and in what proportion is all down to you, right?
Absolutely.
And it's that kind of allowing people, giving people the space to really explore that and say, hey, this is what I want. Okay, excellent. Once you know what it is that you want, then we can figure out how to get there, right? But it's that kind of, but that is a process, because there's so much ingrained in there that people are so subconsciously not aware of. They're like, yeah, of course, this is what world is. And it's kind of shoveling all of that through all that dirt and the shit, right? And say, look, what are the nuggets here that kind of the key success factors to Becky's life? Other things, right? And it's not the millions of things, right? It is the core things that you cannot live without, right? What is that? And then, more of your life around that. And yes, there are, if you're in employment, yes, you have to be in the office doing this and this. But then it's all about that. How do you want to feel? Right? Life isn't about, we talked about proving to others that I've got it in order. Right? You've got no one else to prove it to except to yourself. Right? And it's all about that mental chatter that you talked about earlier. It was also, using that mental chatter to help you rather than sabotage you. Right? Because that mental chatter is so strong, and it's sometimes so toxic, and it's so horrible to ourselves, right? That if we actually spoke out word for word what is said in our heads, people would leave us, wouldn't touch us with a barge pole.
You wouldn't say it to your friends, would you? This is the thing, the stuff that goes on up here. You wouldn't say that out loud to your friends, would you?
Exactly. Exactly. Awesome. Great conversation. Love that. Love that. Yeah.
All right.
See you next week. I'll see you in 2 weeks.
Yes.
Have fun next week. See you later.
Bye. If you enjoyed this episode, follow us for more unpacked and unfiltered Tuesday sessions. In the meantime, you can find us hanging out online over on LinkedIn, where you can find out more about what we do at Happy Bunny Coaching and Rebecca Jane Virtual Business Support. Links in the comments. See you next time.